Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm Eric and we are still trying to review every movie ever made, and we're going to start off this week with Miss Sloane. This is a recent movie starring the great, one of my favorite actresses working today, Jessica Chastain, as a powerful Washington lobbyist, and the whole movie is a sort of about the twists and turns of a particular project she's working on, and sort of the somewhat seedy underbelly of DC and what goes into lobbying and all of that. It's the sort of movie I would describe as being a good kind of boring. It's a slow and deliberate movie that's a lot about process and machinations that, while Chastain is sort of moving chess pieces around on the board, are not always clear what the end goal is. But by the end of the movie, you understand what she was up to and why she was doing it. Jessica Chastain gives a typically impeccable performance in the movie. She's playing a very reserved sort of character, and she does that sort of thing very, very well. This movie was directed by John Madden, who had directed a similar movie that I also liked a lot a few years back with George Clooney in it called Michael Clayton, that I believe that one was more about a lawyer, so lobbyist, lawyer, not so different. There's not a ton I have to say about this, except that, like I say, it was a very satisfying movie and a very satisfying look at that sort of world of lobbying and what goes into it, and while also dealing with ideas of ethics and morality. I liked it a lot. I'm going to give Miss Sloane 4 stars. Up next, I want to talk to you about Willow. This is a movie, the 80s, late 80s, early 90s fantasy picture from director Ron Howard and producer George Lucas that stars Warwick Davis, who is a little person who had previously played one of the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi and those weird TV Ewok movies. He's also a guy who has been in a ton of stuff, from Harry Potter to probably his outside of Star Wars anyway, his best known role as the Leprechaun, the killer leprechaun in the Leprechaun movies. Willow, like I say, it's sort of a fantasy, kind of a Tolkien riff that, like I say, came out in the 80s and early 90s. That's a movie that I don't remember very well from being a kid. My primary memories of it are that I had the sticker book. I really liked sticker books, and for some reason I had the Willow sticker book. And from the scene toward the end where everybody gets turned into pigs, which really bothered me as a kid and is still a little bit unpleasant to watch. Like I said, I had not seen it in probably, not to give away too much of my age, but like probably 25 years. But I've been curious lately. It's a movie people talk about. You hear people especially referencing Val Kilmer's turn as the mercenary Mad Mardigan a number of times. So I decided to check it out, and you know what? I really enjoyed it. It's a really effective fantasy with really fun characters. Davis is perfectly charming in it, as is Kilmer and the rest of the cast. It's a movie that works very well, and a movie that I think works better than it should, particularly given Lucas's non-Star Wars track record. It's just a fun movie, and I did enjoy watching it. If I have a gripe with it, it's that I don't especially care for the brownies. They're these two little kind of Smurf-sized dudes that run around for comic relief, one of which is played by Kevin Pollak. I could take or leave those guys. But otherwise, I thought it was a fun movie with a lot of really effective effects work, a lot of great practical effects work. I'd recommend watching it. It's a good time. I'm also going to give Willow 4 stars. Friends, today I would like to talk to you about The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. This is a Don Knotts starring picture where Don Knotts plays a guy who he's a would-be reporter. He wants to be a reporter, and he kind of stumbles across a story about a fake haunting that, in true sitcom comes to the movies fashion, is going to involve him spending the night in a haunted house. Now, believe it or outside of maybe the fantastic Mr. Limpet, I don't think I've ever seen a whole Don Knotts movie. But I noticed this one was going to be on Svengoolie, the great horror host show on MeTV, one of the very few remaining horror host shows going, and certainly the only national one. And I thought it would be a good time to check it out, and I liked it. I can't say that this was the greatest movie I've ever seen or the funniest, but it was certainly charming and a good time. This would be a fun one for the family, and it features not just Knotts, but a number of other great sitcom stars in it. So it's a really fun movie. I'm going to give it 3 stars. The Polka King is a new Netflix original movie starring Jack Black in a true story about the life of a man who was, well, he was the Polka King. He was a regional polka star with like his own TV show and everything, and people loved him, and he would tour around to like fairs and play those and stuff. He also owned a gift shop and took people on tours of Poland. The problem was that he was also involved, the ringleader of a Ponzi scheme. And the movie makes it pretty debatable whether he was really trying to defraud anyone or not, or simply trying to keep things afloat in his effort to make people happy. But there's no ignoring, his lust for fame in this. Jenny Slate co-stars as his wife, who wants to be. For the life of me, I can't remember what state this all takes place in. I want to say New Jersey, but I don't think that's right. But at any event, so she wants to be like Miss New Jersey, so there's a whole plot where he's going to buy off Miss New Jersey so she can be Miss New Jersey. It's a good movie. It's a fun and watchable movie that's worth your time. It's a little wishy-washy in terms of motivations, right? Like it sort of plays both sides of things and leaning toward that Jack Black's Polka King is an okay guy, but I wish they had sold that more. Still, it's a fun movie. It's 3 stars. Now, watching the Polka King intrigued me enough that I decided I wanted to go back and watch the documentary it was based on, also conveniently available on Netflix, called The Man Who Would Be Polka King, which was, like I said, the documentary about this guy. I wanted to see this largely because I had questions from the Polka King, including that the movie The Polka King alleges that this guy knew the Pope. So I was wondering if The Man Who Would Be Polka King might clear that up, and yeah, it sure did. And yeah, apparently this guy somehow knew the Pope and could swing a visit with the Pope for the people he would take on tours to like Poland and Italy and stuff. Weird stuff. The documentary, like you can see where somebody wanted to make a movie based off this documentary. The documentary is okay, but it suffers in a lot of ways from lower production value and from some idiosyncrasies in telling the story that the movie cleans up nicely. If you're going to watch one of the two, I would say watch the Jack Black movie, and I would probably give The Man Who Would Be Polka King 2.5 stars. Today must be the day for Netflix originals and documentaries, because up next we have a Netflix original documentary. This one's called Long Shot. Now this is a shortish film. It's, I don't think, longer than like 40 minutes. And it's an interesting story. I had seen the trailer for this, and the trailer intrigued me. It's about a man who is accused of murder, and his alibi ends up resting on that he had been at a Mets game where the TV show Curb Your Enthusiasm happened to be filming. And so a big crux of this is, can we find footage of this guy at this game on the tapes from Curb Your Enthusiasm? Unfortunately, this is also a movie where once you've seen the trailer, you've kind of got the deal. The movie itself, even at 40 minutes, feels a bit long. It's all right, though, and it's certainly not worth your time. It's certainly novel enough and interesting enough. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. Okay, folks, I think it's time for MST3 A to Z. So this is, of course, the part of the show where we are looking at every Mystery Science Theater 3000 movie in alphabetical order, and that means that today we're going to start by talking about Bloodlust. Now, Bloodlust is, I think, one of the more watchable of the movies featured on Mystery Science Theater. This one is a riff on the classic short story, The Most Dangerous Game, wherein a group of teens find themselves on an island owned by a rich guy who gets his jollies from hunting people for sport. This one features Mike Brady as one of the teens in that kind of 50s movie style thing where all of the teens are being played by 20-somethings. It's a fairly short movie, fairly fast-paced. There's a decent amount of action and running around in it, which helps. There's some good pulp thrills, particularly when they find the bad guy, both the bad guy's kind of trophy room and his sort of taxidermy room. It's all right. It's still not particularly good, and even for as short as it is, it certainly drags in places and very quickly becomes repetitive. It's also a movie that has, for some reason, a plethora of unnecessary side characters, including a captain for the boat that the teens were on. Why the teens couldn't captain their own boat, I don't know. And then this weird, the rich guy has this, I can't remember if it's his wife or if it's just some lady and her boyfriend or husband that also live in the mansion. I'm not really sure what they're doing there. This is a movie that repurposed, maybe 20 or 30 years later during the slasher craze, I think you could have done something with. Certainly that Most Dangerous Game prototype is a really durable one. As it is, not entirely without merit, 2 stars. As is often my wont, I'm going to give you a double feature here in the MST section, and we're going to talk about The Blood Waters of Dr. Z, which is also known as Zat. This is a movie about a scientist who turns himself into a fish man and then stalks around trying to find a lady that he can turn into a fish woman. Now, whereas Bloodlust is not that bad, Blood Waters of Dr. Z is that bad. This is a really bottom-of-the-barrel movie. It is a boring and ponderous movie that it's made very much on the cheap by a guy who didn't really know what he was doing but thought he could cash in with some sort of a monster movie. It features a number of very lengthy and ponderous scenes of a scientist hanging around his lab that also, amongst other things, features this giant, weird Wheel of Fortune thing that has every step of his plan to becoming a fish man and what he's going to do once he's a fish man that somehow also, I think, involves Nazis. It's a really cheap movie. It's also a movie that I can only describe as greasy. This is a movie that, man, every part of it just feels really sleazy and poorly conceived of. It's a movie that feels like a mistake at every moment. And while this was a terrifically entertaining episode of Mystery Science Theater, as a movie itself, it is really bottom of the barrel. I can only give The Blood Waters of Dr. Z a 0.5 star. All right, guys, it is time for just one more thing, and that means it's time for the Columbo Files. Today on the Columbo Files, Columbo Cries Wolf. This is an 80s episode of Columbo, or a 90s rather, episode of Columbo. So this is after, Columbo had been on for a while in the 70s and then gone away, and then they decided to bring him back for more TV movies in the 90s. This is one of those. This is toward the end of all Columbos. And I'll tell you right now, the 90s Columbos are not as good as the 70s Columbos. I think for a lot of reasons. There's a certain degree to where Columbo as a character just fits better in the 70s, and there's also a degree to where the 90s movies, being a half hour longer, tend to involve more padding and all of that. But Columbo Cries Wolf, this one features a murder, or at least a missing person, at what is essentially the Playboy Mansion. Now, the problem with this one for me is, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spoil the heck out of this thing. So if for whatever reason you, like me, have been spending a lot of your time watching old Columbos, you might want to skip ahead. But here's the deal. So typically in the first 20, 30 minutes of a Columbo, somebody gets murdered and you watch it happen, and then the joy of the show is watching Columbo solve it. These, as I have said before, are not whodunits, these are how-catchems. How is Columbo going to catch the guy? Well, early into the show, it's ambiguous whether somebody has been murdered or not. And at the end of the movie, it turns out that nobody had been murdered, that this was an elaborate missing person kind of an affair, a staged death in order to pull some shenanigans with selling the magazine and all that. So that's part of the problem. Is part of that joy of watching Columbo solve it is also in watching him be one step ahead, is that the criminal thinks they've got it figured out and that they've got Columbo fooled, but then knowing that Columbo knows that this guy, he knows what the deal is, and he just needs to finish getting all the clues together. The end of this one is also a little bit BS because it involves the lady who had gone missing returns most of the way through it, but then the guy who had been accused of murdering her ends up murdering her anyway, which Columbo solves very quickly, and also doesn't seem super annoyed by. You'd think Columbo would be more upset that an unnecessary death had happened. Still, there is a large amount of camp value to Columbo wandering around a Playboy mansion and being all like weird and shy about what's going on and stuff. This one's okay. It's just nowhere near the heights of a truly solid Columbo. So I'm going to give this one 2.5 stars. It's time to talk horror movies, which means only one thing. It's calling all horror hounds. Yes, horror hounds. Today we're going to talk about The Bye-Bye Man. Now, The Bye-Bye Man is not a movie I would typically watch. A lot of these, these recent sort of DTV destined, or original independent horror movies are pretty bad. And about 5 or 10 minutes into The Bye-Bye Man, you want to say bye-bye to The Bye-Bye Man. That's right. Now, the only reason I watched this one, let alone watched it all the way through, is it was featured on one of my favorite bad movie podcasts. Yes, you longtime viewers know I listen to a bunch of podcasts. This one was featured on a show called The Flophouse that features 3 guys talking about bad movies, including Elliott Kalan, who had been the head writer on The Daily Show and currently on Mystery Science Theater, as well, and his 2 friends. It's a great podcast. Bye-Bye Man, not a great movie. The concept's not bad. This is a sort of supernatural boogeyman kind of movie wherein the characters see the name Bye-Bye Man written down on something, and the premise is that if you think about the Bye-Bye Man, that's how he can get you, is he can get you if you're thinking about him. So the trick is to not think about him, but that's like saying, if I say spotted pink elephant, then tell you not to think of a spotted pink elephant. You're going to think about that spotted pink elephant, right? Well, when you say Bye-Bye Man, you're thinking about the Bye-Bye Man. And then the Bye-Bye Man is I hate saying this, the Bye-Bye Man is sort of passed like a virus from one person to the next, because if you tell somebody about the Bye-Bye Man, now they're thinking about the Bye-Bye Man, and you can't stop the Bye-Bye Man. So it's not a terrible premise. It's executed very, very poorly in a very poorly shot, dingy, and confusing movie. That sort of randomly has a couple of, not big, but adequately sized stars in it in very small roles. I did not care for this movie. I don't think you will either. I'm going to give it 1.5 stars. Yes, friends, it is time for no one's favorite part of the show. This is the worst of the week. This week's Worst of the Week is another movie that I watched because of a podcast. In this case, I've mentioned it on here before. How did this get made? This movie is called Ultraviolet. This is a movie that stars Mia Jovovich as a pseudo-vampire living in a world where, everybody has become pseudo-vampires. Listen, guys, here's the thing. This is a movie I had seen before. My little brother, who co-stars on Bad Movie Brothers with me, and we went and saw this thing in the theater. I think it was around my birthday. And for the longest time, September, which is when my birthday is, has been a dumping ground for the worst movies. And so I used to really like to go to the theater on my birthday, and for the longest time, you could not find a halfway decent movie at the theater to see on my birthday. But almost inevitably, in September, a movie starring Mia Jovovich is going to come around, and so I would see that. Now, Mia Jovovich, I have very conflicted feelings about as a film star. I think she can be a capable actress, and I think she's a capable action movie star. There is some fun in watching her jump around and kick dudes and all of that. And there are Mia Jovovich movies that I think are worthwhile or worth watching. The problem, though, is that Mia ends up finding herself in a lot of really bad movies. The Resident Evil movies being the primary source of your primary Mia Jovovich delivery system are pretty hit and miss, and even the hits don't hit very hard. Ultraviolet just does not work as a movie at any point. And so even though Mia is occasionally enjoyable in it, she really needs to be given something to work with, and she really needs a skilled director, and she has neither of those here. I could not explain the plot of Ultraviolet to you, which involves her trying to safeguard a small child whose blood can maybe cure vampirism or something. That's not going to happen. This movie is inscrutable. At no point can you know what's going on in this. Further, the effects in this are garbage. Anytime you go into a major action set piece, it feels less like you're watching a movie than you are watching a cut scene from a particularly cheap video game. So there's nothing in here that's enjoyable. There is no reason to watch Ultraviolet unless you're a Mia completist. I can only give Ultraviolet a single star. Well, there's only one way to wash the taste of the worst of the week out of our mouths, friends, and that's with the best of the bunch. This week, the best of the bunch is Strictly Ballroom. Yes, the very first film from Baz Luhrmann, the great Australian director who you might know from Romeo and Juliet, and especially for me, Moulin Rouge. Before those movies, he made Strictly Ballroom. This is an Australian movie about ballroom dancing that flirts at times with being a little bit of a mockumentary. There is some of that direct address-to-camera stuff in it, but that gets lost pretty soon. And what you end up with is a truly terrific romance film about a dedicated ballroom dancer who wants to eschew the apparently rigid rules of the world of ballroom dancing and do some crazier stuff. He, of course, loses his dancing partner, ends up teaming up with an inexperienced dancing partner, and while he's teaching her to be a great ballroom dancing star, they, of course, fall in love. This movie is enormously charming, particularly the dance sequences, and particularly a dance sequence on top of a family restaurant that is just wonderful to look at. It is a typically beautiful-looking Baz Luhrmann film. It is charming as all heck, and there are a lot of hints of what's to come from Baz. You know, if you're a fan of Moulin Rouge, you're going to see the seeds of that in this movie. So it's not quite as good as Moulin Rouge, which we here and every movie ever are huge fans of. But it is a very, very good movie. It's very charming. There are some twists and turns to the plot that, while a little cliched, all work just because of not just the razzle-dazzle of the production, but the charm of all of the actors and that Baz can bring to the project in general. I don't have a ton to say about this because I really think you need to see it. I really think that, like I say, all of the dancing sequences are great. You know, the acting is, you know, the characters are a bit two-dimensional. This is a little bit more, like I say, of a cliched or fairy tale movie, but it more than makes up for all of that with its enormous heart. Strictly Ballroom, 4 stars. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Every Movie Ever. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll be back next time as we keep trying to see every movie ever made.